Good evening and welcome to Awakened Living Television. My name is TJ Woodward. I am the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living in San Francisco. I'm very excited about this evening's show. We have Lori Jean Glass with us, and our topic is love addiction. And there's going to be probably a lot of different directions we take the conversation, but I am very excited to have Lori Jean on the show. I'm not going to do a big intro piece because I actually want to get right into our conversation with Lori Jean. But I do want to say that my intention for Awakened Living and Awakened Living Television when we started this show some months back was to provide a forum where we would have a real conversation about 21st century spirituality. And if spirituality doesn't work, we might say life-affirming principles or a way to live our life to the fullest. And what I intended to have as the way we provide this, or the conversation that we have here on this show, is I began to ask myself, who are the people that I love to be in conversation with? And Lori Jean is clearly one of those people in my life. We haven't known each other too long, but what I have experienced of Lori Jean is this incredible authenticity and depth in our conversations. So I am very grateful to have Lori Jean on the show. Lori Jean, welcome.
Thank you, TJ. It's great to be here. And again, my name is Lori Jean, and I'm actually the program director at Five Sisters Ranch. And we're a treatment facility for women that specializes in love addiction, love avoidance, and codependency. And oftentimes people ask me, to define love addiction. And the way that I define it is it's that unmet longing. It's that place inside of you that feels very empty, and you're looking and looking to fulfill it, and perhaps have maybe used drugs and alcohol in the past, money, shopping, sex, whatever. But eventually it leads to relationships, and people that have a tendency to get into relationships where they're not fulfilled or hop from one relationship to another is really kind of where it starts.
Well, thank you for that intro, and I'm very excited about being in this conversation because I'm one of those people, quite frankly, who has had that deep longing, and it's come out in all kinds of absurd ways, including, I would say, addictive relationships and love addiction. And I heard someone describe this addiction process as the great ache.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
and that
Yeah.
it's that she's walking around with this great ache, and she's trying to find anything to change that or to shift that. So I wonder, because there's a lot of different ways we can go with this conversation, but I would like to know, I want to get right into it actually.
Okay.
I would like to know if you can share some of your own personal story around this great ache and the ways that
Absolutely.
you've tried to fix that.
Absolutely, yeah. I believe that, well, first of all, it's important to talk about the umbrella of love addiction, so I can share my story and then relate it to the umbrella. Underneath love addiction, there's also love avoidance, and people have a tendency to either want relationship or run away from relationship. And oftentimes it stems from attachment. There's a lot of different publications about the attachment theory, and sometimes the attachment disorder, and how we bond initially as children. And overall, it really ends up being three major styles of attachment, which is anxious, avoidant, and secure. When you think about an anxious attachment, it's that child that grows up with a parent that is so busy and everything is so hectic that they just start pushing away at a very young age because they don't trust this bond. They don't trust that relationship, and it's very, very hard. I have an interesting story, like many people out there. And when I was very young, my father drowned, and he was a basketball coach. And I'm originally from West Virginia. That's why I have the two names. And, after his death, there was this void. And my mom did not deal with that tragedy in a way that was healthy and turned to alcohol. So she was gone, too. So that it was almost like being born into this world and then all of a sudden having these two huge wounds. they were both gone, and it was avoidant. And I navigated through life for many decades, looking and looking and looking, and longing and longing and longing for someone to come in and make that go away, that pain. And, I talk to women all the time who, latch on. I have 2 teenage boys. They refer to it as like a stage 5 Klingon. It's that, it's that person that latches on because they so desperately want to be loved. And yet they're not even mindful, really, of who they're picking. Anything will do. The stories we've heard at the ranch are, women sleeping on doorsteps and, just drive-bys and trying to get a guy off drugs so that they'll love them. The stories are just endless. And meanwhile, their spirits are being really affected.
2 things come to mind when you tell that story, and one is one of my first spiritual teachers who's from the South, so her name was and is Mary Helen, so she had a 2 name as well, and just the most incredibly enlightened being that I've ever met. And she said, it's as if we walk around with our umbilical cord in our hand, trying to find a place to plug it in.
That's right. For love addicts, definitely. For love avoidance, we take that umbilical cord and we stick it in our pocket because we don't trust that we'll ever find a place to plug it in.
So in your own story, I want to ask the question, but then remind me to come back to my second point from that opening, because there's some really juicy stuff in there I'd like to discuss further. But in your own story, were you then more love avoidant, or were you?
I was both, and we call that the ambivalent love addict, which I can thank Susan Peabody for that definition.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it's when you have both. So what I craved more than anything was intimacy and love. And what I feared more than anything was intimacy and love. So I would go and grab it and get it. And then I couldn't have anything that was healthy because then I didn't know how to show up for it because it was too painful. What if they left? It sounds very complicated sometimes when you're explaining it, but when you get into an individual storyline, it's easy to see the patterns. It's easy to see where these relationship patterns started and how they've manifested over a lifetime. We do a relational timeline at Five Sisters Ranch, and it's so cool because it gives the women an opportunity to see that this pattern that they're living out relationally that's the most destructive is being repeated over and over and over again, and it really stems from this original trauma wound.
Mm-hmm. And the original trauma wound is generally in very early childhood, right? From their parents or their primary relationships.
Oftentimes with this intensity around love addiction, yeah, definitely.
Because in my own story, because I'll share some of that too, because I definitely am also the both. I'm the love avoidant and love addicted without a doubt. And in my own story, my father was not there.
Yeah.
I mean, physically, emotionally, and certainly spiritually not there. And my mother was very depressed. There was a lot going on there, but neither one of them were actually there. And so I grew up, somehow, I made a decision very early there was something wrong with me. Yeah. And I remember at age 7 closing off like it was yesterday, just actually physically shutting down. And there was a message that I gave to myself, which was, and it's some variation. I have a different relationship with that knowing, looking back as I've been in my own recovery process.
Right.
But as best I can see from this vantage point, somehow the decision was, I'm not okay. Right. I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve it.
Right. Well, self-esteem, building self-esteem and learning good self-care is one of the antidotes. You've got to be able to, that's part of the process in the healing process, is to really learn how to be your own adult and come in and help heal that. And it's being able to learn how to have esteem. Yeah, definitely. And that's very common in those types of stories. Not to minimize your experience, but to really just, and the other thing too is I'm all about, letting people know that they can change. And that's the message I think we don't hear enough, because for me, it's the labels aren't important. Love addiction, love avoidant. Let's just say, you know what? You aren't very good at relationships. You know, I mean, we make
Right.
it so complicated sometimes, and I think that it's important to let people know that we can change. You know, my mom died in my late teens, and she was an alcoholic, and she never recovered from my dad's death. And you know, it's like I don't have to have that life, and yet I recreated that life. You know, when I was 37 years old, I walked into the rooms of AA saying, you know, I'm Lori Jean, I'm an alcoholic, and that was my first step into a path of recovery. Little did I know that the codependency and the love addiction and everything else was going to come after me like a tidal wave, because once I was sober, I could not be relational in a healthy way. And I run in across people all the time, and people with religious journeys that, you know, turn their will and life over to the care of Christ or whatever religion they believe in. And then all of a sudden, you know, their pain bodies, you know, I love Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, the pain bodies are getting affected because of these relationships they're in. And sometimes they have to go back and really do that attachment work.
Well,
Does that make sense?
No, you are speaking my language, and I'm really excited because you just entered the conversation that I wanted to come back to, which is doing the work that I do as a minister and also the work that I've done working in treatment centers in the recovery world and in my own personal recovery.
Okay. You know, what I'd like to tell you is that one of the biggest challenges that I see, and something to really be aware of, which you probably already are, is that it's very hard for someone with a lot of complex trauma to believe, to have faith, because having faith requires faith in believing in something that in the beginning of that journey is not always so clear. You know, a relationship with something greater than yourself is something that needs to be nurtured and tended to. Well, if you have these attachment wounds or attachment disorder, unmet longing, love addiction, codependency, love avoidance, whatever it is, it's really hard to go into that. I mean, I did the whole fake it till you make it for decades, not knowing how to really believe. And going to churches and singing the songs and going through, you know, different programs, and yet when I finally went back and really looked at healing this attachment piece, I was able to attach to something because we don't feel good enough for something bigger than ourselves. Does that make sense?
No, that's exactly right for me and the work that I do, because I've been a spiritual director of a treatment center, and what happens and what I see happening often in treatment centers and the recovery world is there wants to be a bypass. It's like, oh, I'm going to turn that over to God. And there's a couple things that come up for me in that conversation. One is, for most of us, our parents are our first idea of a higher power or of a God.
Well, they're our first bond.
It's our first bond.
I mean, we're inside that body for 9 months.
Absolutely. And then if those primary caregivers aren't there for us, right, then how can we, when we get into recovery, because obviously removing the drugs and alcohol is the first step, right? For some. Yeah. In working in the treatment world, certainly it is. And it was in my own journey. And then there was this whole other, you know, journey that needed to happen, and exactly what you're talking about. And what I find in the recovery world quite often is there wants to be a bypass. And I think you know what I mean by that, where it's just, I'm just going to turn this over without looking at the deeper attachment, really.
Right. And like everything, it's not black and white, good or bad. Like you can have that. For some people that works beautifully. And I marvel at that. I'm like, I wish I could have just done it that way. Yet when we don't have faith that a relationship is going to actually be there for us, we simply can't do it.
Right.
Until we go back and we treat that wound.
Right.
It doesn't happen. Or we befriend it enough to understand it. Like I tell people that are really close to me that I've got this button installed in me. It's right here, and it's my abandonment button. And I can no longer be in relationship with people that are going to abandon me. And I've had some pretty unhealthy relationships, and I can no longer show up for them. You know, if someone's going to be constantly pressing on that abandonment button, even with all the work I've done, it's still there. It will always be there. It's my pain body.
That's a big piece too that you're saying, because I hear often, in the work that I do around spirituality, which is really to me integrating this inner experience, right? This deeper root, being deeply rooted in my own core of my
Right.
being,
Right.
right? I find that quite often the conversation, and there's this phrase that, like, talking about that hole inside, and that only God can fill that up. But to me, what I've had to come to, or what I've come to in my own journey, is that I've had to learn that I'm going to walk in the world with that. And that's a very different thing than I'm going to find even the idea of a higher power to fix that, right? And when I come to that and learn that I'm going to walk in the world, I guess that's the difference between religion and spirituality. That cliche, religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell, and
Right.
spirituality is for those of us who have been there.
Right, yeah. And I have a challenge with that
Okay.
phrase.
Yeah?
Well,
Okay,
just
tell
because,
me.
well, I just know a lot of people that have a deep belief in a religious environment that have found a way to have access to something that gives them great faith and love.
Yes.
My sister is a devout Christian, and her and Jesus are buddies, and I love watching that in her. And she doesn't try to throw it on me. So for some people that can really work. I think what's important is to find what works for you.
Yes.
Spirituality, religion, call it what you want. If you have the ability to be able to breathe into something that you can feel, whether that's your spirituality, whether that's the Holy Ghost, whether that's whatever it is, and be free in that moment, and I think that's what it's about.
Yes, absolutely. And perhaps it's much less about what we believe, but how we are in the world, right? Being really present and finding, like you say, our own path, whatever that is.
Which I love your intro, because that's what
Yeah.
you're referring to. Absolutely, absolutely. And find it, and I'm so grateful for the opportunities. I never thought I would say that I'm a grateful, recovering, love addict. It's not really something you want to tell people.
Right. Not on a first date, for sure.
No, but not even after I've been with my boyfriend for 6 years. It's like he's in a total different industry. Hi, I'm his girlfriend. I'm a love addict. I mean, what is that, right? People, that's why I'm not into the labels. But if somebody got to know me and sat down, they would realize that, wow, this woman can show up for love.
Yeah.
That's incredible today.
And that's powerful. That statement right there, you can show up for love.
Right. And know what I need and what I'm capable of giving and honoring that. Because, like, for example, people that have been sexually abused, safety is paramount for them. If they're not feeling safe relationally, then they're not in a relationship that is going to be honorable and reciprocal. So that storyline is with that person. So we all have to really, I think, really know what it is that we're capable of doing. It's like you don't apply for the CEO job if you can't do it.
Right.
Well, some people do, but
Right.
we got to know what we can show up for.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing, and I know you don't talk about clients specifically, but is there a story, because I've been to Five Sisters Ranch, and it is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean the physical, surroundings, which of course are beautiful, but there is a very powerful, I would say, safe, healing. There's something really powerful that's happening there. It was evident to me as I pulled into the parking lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can share, in a general way, just something that's happened there with a client that has been really powerful, that something that, those moments, because I do this work, these moments that change our lives.
Yeah, I'll try to do it without crying.
Okay, no, and please.
Yes, because we've changed many lives there.
Yes.
And I think first and foremost I need to start with, the founder, Nancy Brown. The reason why that facility is what it is from her amazing vision and I think really from her heart. She's so open and loving and giving, and when she brought me on to be the director, she trusted me, and together, we work really well together, and it is there, and it has the feeling it has. We're the only, I believe, LEED Platinum certified facility in the world, and that's out of her love for the earth. So just that intention behind everything that we do there was very thought out. And anyway, I don't want to get into a sales pitch on Five Sisters Ranch, but it's pretty incredible. So
It is
thank
very
you for
incredible,
that.
yeah.
But regarding the type of client that we work with, we had a woman that called us, and she was in a lot of pain, and she was cheating on her husband, and she couldn't show up for the intimacy. Small children, not knowing, really how to show up, and she called. Her husband found out she was cheating, and came to our ranch. And in the course of the time she was with us, she was able to do her relational timeline and her survival patterns and understand why she was acting the way she was acting. Like it became crystal clear to her. And because of that, she was able to communicate with her husband and talk with him about what was really going on for her, not the drama. Like this is what was real. And because it was real, it had foundation. She wasn't just giving him a story so she could get the key back. She was truly transforming because she finally realized that the reason why she was going elsewhere was because no matter what, it was never enough. She had unrealistic expectations out of relationships, and that need for positive regard was just suffocating her every day. And her fear of intimacy was keeping her from looking into the eyes of her own children and being able to be there. So in the course of the work that we did with her, she was able to go back and start one day at a time, reliving the life with her husband, committed, focused, with belonging in treatment and getting help, and over time has been able to, create bonds with her children just by clearing up that old trauma wound that she had, and really redirect her life. And what was really cool is last Christmas her husband called and said, we're redecorating the house and I want to surprise my wife for Christmas, and I'd love it if you would send me some photos of Five Sisters Ranch. And he decorated her home office with all these photos so she could have that feeling by looking at the landscape and that big driveway you're talking about, and just putting families back together. Because she loves her husband. She wants to be with her husband, but she didn't know how. She didn't know how.
Wow, and that to me, because I have stories like that in working with clients that just changed my life.
Yeah.
Being a witness to that true transformation where someone, and see that to me, regardless of whether it's religious or spiritual, that to me, that connection, that moment when someone can, and myself, in those moments when I've been able to really transform this old story, because they really are old stories, old wounds.
They are.
And
They are. Sometimes those relational timelines are several feet long, sometimes, like 20 feet long. And it's really cool because before they go home, we have a burning ceremony, and we invite them to leave their story, as much of it as they can, and try to step into this new way of being, knowing that they're going to get triggered, those pain bodies are going to get activated, yet they can choose. They can choose. People can change. Sometimes what's that old thing? Spots don't change. What's that saying?
I don't know.
You don't know that one?
I don't know that one.
Leopard doesn't change his spot, something like that.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but people change. People do change.
Well,
I was a cheerleader, obviously.
Yeah.
People can change. They really can.
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that you just spoke to that I think is really powerful is I didn't know I was choosing.
Exactly.
And that, to me, is whether we call it recovery or whether we call it integration or whether we call it spirituality, it's that moment where I realize, oh my gosh, I choose.
Right. And
I'm choosing this.
That's right. And the reason why sometimes we get caught up in the bad relationships is we do choose what we know. It's familiar. We go back to what we know all the time.
Right.
Always going back to people that were walking away. Because that's how I was able to get power and feel good by grabbing them, choking them, turning them around, making them walk towards me.
Well, and if my story is I'm not good enough or I'm not enough, or my story, like one of my stories is men are not available. men are just not there.
Right.
And that was confirmed by my mother's perception, and it was confirmed
Right.
by it was solidified by my father not being there.
Right.
So I walked around the world. It was like it was a computer program, and I was programmed then to say, this is what love is. So I identified that, and it wasn't until I got into recovery, a long time in recovery, and doing some of this deeper work, where I realized that I can make a different choice.
And it affects everything, it affects our financial situation. I mean, a lot of us, will go out and try to get relationships and end up in debt, it's really, it crosses all the lines, all the lines.
Believe it or not, we only have a few minutes left, so I don't even know what the question is. So I'm wondering if you might know for yourself what else you feel wants to be shared, or anything else, either about your own personal journey or about Five Sisters or about this topic.
Well, I think what I said earlier that's really important is to know that people can change. There is help out there. That, if you're tired of falling into the same pattern, the same type of situation relationally, that you can do something different. And it's not a straight line. It's not a straight line, and people do and can recover. And it doesn't have to be in treatment, or it doesn't have to be in the recovery context. We get a lot of women at Five Sisters Ranch that aren't alcoholic, aren't drug addicted, have never don't even know what the word recovery means. And they find us online and watch our little video on there and cry because we're speaking directly to them. And I think that's what I really want to get across, is that, you can get help, and that people do change. And if you've been diagnosed with, depression, anxiety, borderline, any of those diagnoses, and you're finding that this core relational piece is not being tended to, call us. There's many great places. There's Five Sisters Ranch, the Meadows. There's the ranch in Tennessee. There's a lot of us out there that are on the front lines, really trying to get people to heal from these relational trauma.
Wow. Well, thank you for your honesty, your authenticity, and your willingness to be present, because it's a powerful experience to be with you. And so I want to personally say thank you for enriching my life. And why don't we take the last minute, literally the last minute, and tell people how to contact you and or Five Sisters. That would be great.
Okay, great. So you can call 707-776-0755. That's the number at Five Sisters Ranch. You can go online at www.fivesistersranch.com, and the 5 is spelled out, F-I-V-E, and sisters is plural.com. And or you can call TJ.
Yes, you can call me.
Yeah, we'd love to talk with you if we can help you or anyone you know. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Laura Jean, so much. I really am so grateful for this conversation, because I feel like in a way, or in many ways, this is the conversation that is so important, because so many people I know, and in my own journey, wherever our life has taken us, whether that's in recovery or in a religion that we found, there's often seems this moment, now what, or what's missing? And for many of us, it's hard to even identify what it is that maybe our soul is longing for. And to me, it's longing for this deep connection to our own essence, our own being, our own authenticity. So thank you, Laura Jean, for being here and participating in this conversation. I am so grateful that you have joined us this evening, and thank you for being here. And if you'd like to join us at Awakened Living, please visit us online at awakenedlivingsf.org. Again, my name is TJ Woodward. I'm the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living, and I say thank you and good night.